Welcome, everybody. This is the Lazy Warlock coming at you with a Speaker Sunday. It's jam-packed full of really cool features. I've decided to make a bit more of a presentation this time because I want people to see this cool new artwork and animations and a little bit of footage from the game because there's a lot going on. Chapter 6 was a hefty chapter. It kind of marks a very important point in not only the development because it's essentially 25% of the storyline. So at least this part of the story. So 25% of the game technically. There's going to be side missions and stuff. So, but the storyline 25%. That's really important. But before I get started, um, I'm a lazy warlock. I'm developing the Lords of Nysera with my lovely wife Lilette. Her microphone is not working this time, so she will not be joining us for this session. But she is helping us in the background. So um, welcome her as well. And thank you all for coming to watch. This will of course be recorded and saved later on our YouTube channel. So if you missed it, don't worry, you can watch it later. So Chapter 6. Is it done? Pretty much. I tested the last couple of events in the game this Saturday, or not Saturday, Friday, and finished the last of them. So all the events work. I checked them in sequence. I just need to make sure that essentially the end goes well, so that you can finish the battle and be like, finish the battle, yes, and then it completes and you get all your rewards and stuff. So that's the easy part, though. That's like I've done that so many times now. It's just literally a really easy thing to do. The hard stuff, though, took a while because, boy, this was a tricky chapter, guys. But it was worth it because we got so many cool features in this one. I'm really proud of how a lot of them turned out. There's some optimizations that were thrown in for the AI as well. And by AI, I mean like the NPC, so like the enemy controls and whatnot, so that they're smarter. It runs way faster because this is a magic heavy chapter. I'm talking like you're facing multiple mages. They've got a medley of spells, and there's not only like priests who are buffing like massive amounts of people, but you've got your classic mages that are lobbing fireballs and using special spells, and you got Riza in the mix, who I need to slow down and relax. I'm excited. I haven't had a public appearance in a while, so I'll chill down and relax. So there's a lot going on, and obviously I'm excited about it because so many of these things that I've worked really hard on have turned out really well, and I haven't had too many big blockages. I had one little trip up that took me about a day to fix, but once it was fixed, it was working great. So let's just start off with what we've got here in this first image. So on the left here is the a big reason for why it was such a heavy scripting coding chapter. Lexicus here is a backer character, and she's actually Lilette's backer character. She has obviously been supporting me for a very long time, but she also has been supporting the game monetarily, and this is her character. A lot of effort was put in not only to her design, but the chapter itself, because it really got me to add in things that were on the back burner. So things that I'm sure Lilette had no idea I had to do for her character, and probably would have been like, oh, well, you don't have to do that. You should just focus on the chapter. But it was really good, actually, because first of all, I got mounting and dismounting fixed and put in the game, which is not an integral part of the game. It's not like necessary, and it won't be really a downside to mount or dismount, but it'll be an option more or less. So like if you want to send a unit into maybe a zone that has a lot of anti-cavalry equipment, right? Then you can dismount them so that they don't get critical easily or something. But more so, I want it so that there's essentially anyone can learn how to ride a horse if you spend the resources to do it, or fly a rook, the big birds. And Lexicus, this character, she is a duelist, so she's actually a ground unit to start with. That's like her background at least. She's not a flyer unit, so I had to finally decide like, okay, I have to do the mounting dismounting code, which was mostly like I need to have some generic sprites so that when people who are not typically flyers or mounted units that they can switch between and have like a pretty seamless looking sprite. So I had to do that. And she was a perfect candidate because she has a druka, which are the bigger birds. So I had to work on a few art pieces to get it done. And then on the side, I also added in the big birds as just regular units as well that are summonable as creatures because she has a summon as well that is one of them. So a lot of lifting just to get her character to even appear in the game, right? um, and then there were all these big so her behavior code in the like where she shows up in the battle, I decided, well, let's do this cool little heisty thing that she does. And that meant I had to do all these conditional scripts to make her so she behaves so that she can loot stuff, which was again another thing on the back burner. I had no way for thieves because she's a thief also. I had no way for thieves to steal things. So now I have the code for thieves to steal things. They'll go actually target loot piles, and there's going to be some fun events in some chapters I have planned now, probably side chapters, where essentially you are racing between a bunch of looters that you don't want to kill them because they're actually like they're not bandits, they're just like rapscallions, right? And you're told specifically like don't kill them, but we should also gather this battlefield loot before these guys do, and then arrest a few of them. So like you can, capture them for crimes and such. But it was fun being able to like put this code in, see it work with Lexicus, and be like, oh, there's a lot of possibilities for fun chapters with this. And just adding it into dungeons where you've got thieves who are trying to steal stuff and so on and so forth. So that was really fun to get done for her character. And then she has all these items too. She has this like medley of cool items that I had wanted to add to the game for a long time, and she's got all that gear now. It's all in the game and working, which is awesome. So yeah, she was a very good push point for a lot of features that had just not been included in the game yet. That were like either half finished or mostly there or kind of there, but just not tuned up. So that was really nice to get done. And then on the right, you can see is Cholet's brand new portrait. So I wanted to show this one off. I was pretty proud of how it turned out. It's still mostly a first pass, so I'm gonna show it off to the Discord and to the Patreon as well, and have people give it critiques to improve it, tune it up, make sure that this character, who's essentially going to be seen throughout the entire game, looks good throughout the entire game. And so far, I think it looks fine. Maybe just got to do a few little tweaks on the eyes and whatnot, but that I always end up doing that. So let's just move right into the what we're going to be talking about. So there were a lot of spells to do for this one, but some of them are really cool. Anyone who's played the demo so far, you've probably tried out a few of the spells. Fireball is a popular one, obviously, because Cholet has it, and in the prologue you get to use it, and it's quite powerful. Um, but it's also probably the simplest of the attack spells. You just throw a fireball, it explodes, it does damage, right? It lights some things on fire, but that's the extent of its uniqueness. Air spells were really interesting because I'd been putting this one off, of course, because it had some tricky stuff that I wasn't sure how to tackle, namely moving units. So one of the basic air spells is Tempest, which you can see in this little Giphy. It pushes units, and I didn't know how I was going to do that properly. So that took a lot of tuning because I had people essentially like compacting into the same space. I had people being pushed too far, not being pushed at all, some things being pushed, some things not being pushed. It was a real interesting programming puzzle, but it works great. And I actually got the code essentially universalized in the game, so I can apply that pushing code to anything now. So if I want to add a single push spell, which I'm going to do, which lets you essentially like smack some guy and launch them 4 spaces away or wherever, and control which direction you move them in, I can do that now. It just didn't have like I'll need to do effects and whatnot, but the actual code to do the pushing is really robust, and I'm really happy with it because it can push anything in the game that's pushable. and there's different types of pushing. So air pushing, for example, with Tempest, it pushes the twisters around, which you can see you can cast Twister. That was a really fun spell to do, not only artistically, because it's got these like swirling bits that I drew individually and resized them and added in like a little code so that it like wiggles around. It's really fun. Um, so that Twister, it when you cast Twister, it'll move vaguely in the direction that you cast it in for like a turn or two. But with the pushing spells, you can push it in a different direction, and then it'll keep moving in that direction. So you can actually ping pong them back and forth um, if you have an enemy trapped between a spot. So, and every time it moves, it'll do damage. So, and those twisters too, I have a plan for them to essentially, if you launch it through some clouds, like or fire, it'll pick up the area effect and change the twister. So lots of really cool combinations that are going to come out of this specific combination of just pushing and moving persistent spells. So that's what we've got here. I've got like mobile spells. These are the big highlights here on the right side here. So you got pushing spells and you got mobile spells, because I've had spells that have an instantaneous effect, right? And then I've had spells that affect the terrain, but I don't have a spell that like acts and moves on the map just yet until now, and that's Twister. So really happy with how both of these turned out, and they have a ton of potential, not only code wise but in the game itself. So yeah, that's that for those spells. And then there's a whole bunch of miscellaneous spells that were added in because, like I said, this is a spell heavy chapter. There's a lot of mages, a lot of priests and magic just going around. And so I just kind of went to town making sure that I got to add whatever I felt like right now, because all of it's going to be useful. All the particles, all the sprites, they essentially get reused in different ways all throughout the game. So this was really fun. So to summarize each of these quadrants here, um, Volcano is not a super new spell. It was featured just a little bit in the Chapter 5 breakdown, but that was pretty scant when I talked about it. So I wanted to give it a little more love here, because this was also a really cool spell, not only because the lava looks fantastic, I think, but because it has a complex area. So this was another little coding puzzle that I had to do, where more or less, rather than just picking the initial spot and then something happens, now you can pick multiple spots. And I made it really easy for myself to make it so that when you pick those multiple spots, it can do different things between them. So some will just repeat like a stamp that area, but some will do lines between them. Some can do a stamp, line, stamp, whatever it may be. So you can have really cool complex things, and they're pretty intuitive to use. Like you just kind of just watch what it does, because it shows you the area it's going to draw. You can cancel back and forth if you don't like it, as long as you don't complete the spell. So that was really cool to see that kind of finished and done. On the right here is summoning. So I've had a basic summoning script in the game, but I haven't had a spell yet that exactly uses it. And this is the first one. And I figured since we were redoing Ania, I would give her a really cool summoning spell to help her become much more useful in the early chapters, because now she can use this wisp staff to summon these little flamey guys, and they don't do a ton of damage, but they bolster your army from 3 to 5 essentially. And not only with that, when they die, they explode, as you can see. So that was some really fun code to add in, not only summoning, but then also these little magic sprite dudes that produce particles on their own. And then the post-death explosion coding was fun to do. So all of that was another like really cool addition to the game that again has like all these potentials. Lots of these are framework things, right? So I make a spell not just to have a spell in the game, right, to fill a role in the tactics, but to open up the door to other more advanced spells or just similar spells, right? That's like, okay, now we have a fire sprite. Well, let's add in air sprite if I so wished, right? The other ones are just kind of general spells, so there wasn't anything really special about them other than I added new particles, and the particles look nice, and I'm really happy with how they look, and they perform well in the game. So on the left here is the kind of the first astral based or light based spell, which they're the most like raw damage output spells because it's like the pure light of creation being used. And this spell is radiance, so it just hits in a big circle and does a crap load of damage. In dark areas, it'll actually illuminate though, so it'll create a light and light up darkness underground, for example, as well, and dispel darkness. So it does an extra bit of stuff, but you just can't see it in this because it's like my debug um, room. And then there's the poison spell, which you've probably been seeing a little bit, and that one is just a classic poison cloud, poisons everything inside. You want to get out of there really fast because poison sucks in the game. It will kill you pretty quickly. And it can be pushed around. It can be dispelled with other air spells and whatnot. It's pretty neat. On the right, oops, I have summoning 2 titles. So, whoops, and I just skipped things. The bottom right one here is just more spells. So they're a little older. Mire, which is the kind of muddy looking thing, similar to Poison Cloud, only it turns the ground muddy. So it slows down enemies, and anything that walks into the mud gets poisoned. So it's more of a deterrence spell than it is really like a pure damage dealing one. If you just want to lock down an area and ruin anyone's day who has to go through it. The other one that showed up a little bit here is an Ice Blast spell that I've had in the game for a little while, but I had to fix it, and for whatever reason, I hadn't fixed it for quite a while, and so I did that. So it's just Ice Blast, freezes things, slows enemies, pretty powerful, and looks nice. The last one, which is really short because and it's kind of small down here, is Purge, and it's just a basic casting. So a casting in the game, for those who haven't played the demo, are essentially weapon spells. So you equip a casting, and it can be just used over and over and over again. It just uses a small amount of your action points compared to, say, a large area spell, which uses a lot. So that, along with Starlight, was another casting they were added in. And usually what I do, so to give a little idea of how I do spells, I typically start with a casting because not only are they easy to code, like there's literally no code required for them. I just have to type up their values and add it into the game. It's the sprite work that is a lot of work because I have to come up with new particles, and then I have to determine how the particles are produced, or if they have like a specific projectile, then I change that projectile and yada yada yada. Um, so I start with those, and then once I'm happy with those, then I can translate those to other spells. So like I did Starlight first, for example, and then I made that big bright radiant spell down here that the Ferenia uses, because once I know what it looks like, it's like, all right, then I can extrapolate that to other things. So that was a lot of fun, and there's probably a few little things. There's lots of conditions and like condition spells that I just didn't have the space to include them in, because I did like 10 different little animations for all the mind altering spells, which I didn't have time to do a slide for, but I am going to talk about. I'm probably just going to go back to one of these and just have it play in the background. But that's a big part of chapter 6, and so I'll talk about that later. But onto the pretty stuff again. Traps. So traps were something I've been wanting to add to the game for a really long time, and I've kind of been dreading having to do the code that is involved with interrupting people when they walk on a trap. So I wasn't sure exactly how balanced it was going to be, and that's going to be something that's got to be play tested. It works right now, but I need to make sure they're not tedious, right? Because traps are fun until they're not fun, right? Because they add a certain element to the game of, uh-oh, I screwed up. But if they're just obnoxious, then there has to be workarounds for it. But they work just as I intended them to work for now, which is they're hidden at first, and you can spot them, but certain people are better at spotting them than others. So your rogues, your thieves, your people with really good eyesight, or who have like trap sense, people who are skilled with that stuff, they will spot them easily. But just because you spot them doesn't mean you can get rid of them necessarily. I am going to make it so that you can just straight up like destroy them. So if you fireball an area, probably it will just obliterate them. But you can also disarm them now. So the first thing was making them actually work. Now they're disarmable as well. So if you have a person with the right skill set, they can go in and they can just boop, disarm it, and they'll get it. So they'll actually get it into their inventory and they can use it themselves. And I did all the work so that your units can drop mines and man traps, and you can see this little sprite here that I was very proud of. Um, there's a whole medley of different traps, and they all kind of act differently. So there's your classic count drops, which are these nasty little foot spikes, right? Where they don't do a whole lot of damage, but they slow you down and they cause a little bit of bleeding, maybe. That's like the simplest one, and anyone can disarm them. There's an artificed version of that that essentially they they do a ton of bleeding because they dig their way in because they're like magical and they're attracted to people, so they kind of just fly at you. Um, and then there's mines, because there's essentially like basic mines in the game. Because as I've mentioned before, there's gunpowder weapons and primitive explosives, and mines are not too difficult to make for the skill set that people have in this world. And so they are made, but they're kind of frowned upon by certain groups because mines historically are not good. They kind of damage more, they do more damage to just populaces than actual enemies. But anyways, that's beside the point. And then there's the man traps, which they just clamp down, and I added in a new little bit of code that makes it so that units can be restrained. So when it clamps down on them, it completely stops their movement. So they have to either use an action themselves to remove themselves from the man trap, and then they can move, or someone else has to come up to that and do it for them. So that was really cool to have that in. And even the man trap, you can't see it because it's beneath the character, but it'll change shape too. So it'll start from an open spot and then it'll actually animate to close, which I thought was kind of cute. Um, even though it's a man trap. And it's obviously a horrible device, but it's just like, anyways, I like the little sprites. I thought they're nice. Um, and then I added in that little slashy animation, which I've gotten pretty good at those. I can crank those out in like an hour. So that was really fun adding all these in. It was a bugger to test because uh, as you can imagine, it was a completely new feature. So I essentially had no clue how bad it would affect the code by adding in essentially this like interruption code. So the idea being you start someone on a path, but it has to know whether or not they can finish that path and then finish that action. And after just a little bit of testing, I realized, okay, it's not so bad. It essentially worked swimmingly. So the first couple times I tried it, I was like, oh, this actually wasn't so bad. I just have to add this little bit into any time someone needs to move, and whoop-de-doo, like it's good. So it works really good. The only thing though that I'm worried about, because it doesn't take your action away. So anyone who's familiar with the Fire Emblem games knows your unit usually has one action per turn. So whether you move them or you attack or you interact with the world, you get your one action and then you're done. So I kind of had to consider, okay, well, should a trap interrupt your, should you lose your action essentially? Because that's a really hefty cost for an individual unit. And for now, all it does is actually interrupt that action. So it essentially stops you from doing whatever you were doing, does its damage, does its effect, and then you can reselect the unit and try and move them again. They still have used up their movement because it still um, it still penalizes you considerably, but you can still attack, for example. So if you get trapped, you can attack, but you might be so weakened at that point you don't want to attack. So again, I'm hoping that this is like a, oh no, I didn't realize I was going to run into this trap. I have to consider what to do. Maybe I send a person in to save them from the trap, or have to use a different person to attack this person I was going to attack. Of course, the use case for the player, I mean, you can probably spam these in a battle real easily against enemies, which is why a lot of them are going to be hard to come by. Um, you'll be able to craft some simple ones, but at the same time, you can run over your own traps. You'll be able to see them, so you can see all the traps that you've placed on the ground, but they're indiscriminate. So unless you have a special skill that lets you essentially step over them, or you're a flyer, flyers can just fly right over them. That was another easy thing to add into it. Um, so this is going to be a really interesting tactical option because uh, in the Fire Emblem games I've played, there's some like weird traps you can place, but they're not very useful because there's only a few of them in the game, and they're so rare that they were only good for like this glitch that you could do in some of them, and that was it. So I'm really curious to see if this is an easily abused thing, or if people are like, it's not that great, but it's a neat like feature for battles, right? Either way, it was really fun to add in, and I think it's going to make a lot of cool opportunities. And plus, like, uh, they can be used in different ways. So flyers can drop lots of them from above too. So you'll essentially be able to carpet bomb certain areas with traps that will just deny enemies. And if enemies don't see them, they won't know to avoid them as well. So it should be really fun to see what happens. Or it'll be annoying and everyone's like, I hate traps. Please remove this from the game. And I might make it so that there's varying levels of difficulty for traps, where maybe um, they only do certain effects on certain difficulties, or they just don't show up on certain difficulties. We'll see. But yeah, that's that. So there was a little sneak peek when I posted the update. These are some of the new advanced weapons that they were pretty much they were part of the stretch goal, right? So part of the stretch goal was there's some really cool stuff in the lore and in the world that they may be a singular unique item that requires an extra bit of code, an extra bit of artwork, and that will be for only that item, right? It won't be used, there won't be like variants of it. It'll just be like, hey, this is a special item. And there may be one or two of them in the game that you find, but I just want this thing to be there because it plays a role in the lore, and it's also very cool. And that's what these are kind of about. These are weapons that I really wanted to include in the game, but only if I had the bandwidth to do it. And because of the stretch goal, I have the bandwidth. So I can add these really neat weapons in and give them cool sound effects with the funds and make them really unique. So let's go over them. The footage you're seeing here is of the linear bow. So a linear bow, for those, you probably know the more common term, which is a rail gun. So a rail gun is essentially what linear bows in this case are based off of. A rail gun uses like literal rails to magnetize a bolt and shoot it. Linear bows are similar, only they use a combination of rails and coils. So imagine if we had come up with the actual technology to make a proper railgun, but then we added a touch, just a little like skosh of magic to it, right? To be able to tie together all those naughty little physical problems that we can't seem to overcome. That's what a linear bow is. So it's really old tech in the game that barely any of them have survived. And the ones that have survived, they are kept under lock and key by the most powerful faction in the game that does not give them up. And so the only people that can get them besides these people are essentially scavengers who have found parts or broken ones that they can like cobble together with pieces. And that's what one of the characters that you meet kind of did. And so she's a really cool character. I should actually include a picture of her. If you've played the demo, you might have seen her if you visited one of the villages. She's in this golden armor and red cloak, and she's a very powerful character. And you meet her in Chapter 6 again. She actually fights with you for a little bit, but she's kind of a late game character, so she shows up just to help out, and you won't get to have her all of her cool equipment. And I'm going to make sure that players don't just be like, this new character, has some really fancy stuff, and I noticed that she leaves after the chapter, so I'm gonna just take all of her stuff away and use it on my other people. I know how to I know how to work around that stuff. I think like a player, right? So you won't get to keep her things. She will keep her stuff even if you take it away from her, and I know how to do it. So she's going to come back. Don't worry, you'll get to use her character. And you can even probably recruit her early if you do her side mission. Probably that's going to be the plan at least. But her weapons are really cool, and the linear bow is one of them. And it has a whole history by itself. It's almost a character by itself, just because of the way people react to it, and it's very powerful. So even in this little Giphy, you can't really tell how good of it is. I was mostly testing just the effects itself, but it essentially ignores armor, and armor is pretty powerful in the game, especially after some of the changes I made to it. Um, so armor is now highly resistant to ranged weapons. So especially arrows. Arrows will essentially not do anything against plate armor in the game. They can still be used against them if you have a good enough archer that does enough damage, and maybe they use some special arrows and a high level bow. But even regular plate armor, historically speaking, was almost immune to like archery and just regular arrows. And I was also feeling like archers were really strong even against armored units. So I made some adjustments. We'll see how it goes in the playtest because people are probably gonna find like, oh, this archer does like nothing to these guys. It's like, yeah, because they've got they got plate armor. It won't his little dinky arrows don't do anything to full plate mail. So, but a weapon like the linear bow, it don't care about how much armor you're wearing because those magnetized bolts will fly right through anything. So it essentially ignores armor. It can shoot individual rounds, so you can just like fight someone with it, just trading rounds, or you can use it as essentially an ability, like a spell. So you can shoot in a line and hit multiple units in a line, as you can see in the Giphy. So that was fun to add that in as like it was kind of the first item in the game that can do that. That is both a weapon and a spell. So there are weapons in the game that are there are items in the game, I should say. There's essentially spell items, at least code wise. They have a spell attached to them, and when they're used, they imitate that spell, but with some added code nonsense that interprets it differently. This was different though because it can both be used as a weapon and as a spell. Better as a spell because you can hit a ton of people with it, but also a very, very powerful weapon. Um, the bow down here is the latest exotic weapon, which is a mage bow. And I should also I'll include a picture of this afterwards. I've designed a bunch of these bows because I was once upon a time very much inspired by a certain game that had a certain type of bow kind of like this. And I thought that is the coolest bow idea ever. Why doesn't anyone do that? And I decided I'm going to expand on that idea a little bit and actually make the magic in it make sense. So you may be looking at it and be like, that doesn't look like a good way to make a bow. And you're right, because that wouldn't be a good way to make a bow. Having a weird thingy on the front, this aperture, would make for a horrible bow. But it doesn't shoot arrows, it shoots magic. Hence the name, a mage bow. So again, I'll post a schematic on it because it actually shows essentially how it works in the world. But the little ends sort of just coalesce magic into them, and then when you wear a ring with it, if you've ever looked up archery rings, it's kind of this take on archery rings in that you use a magic ring or any ring actually, and it can attract that magic that those ends attract to the ring. And when you pull it back, it pulls it into a magic arrow. And that little diamond aperture is essential because that's where it pulls it through. So it's actually based on some analytical chemistry stuff that I did a bunch of work for before I started making games. And so it actually has some real world physics sort of intermingled into it that makes it into a weapon. So it's both magic and science. And I've always wanted it to be in the game, but I had to take an extra step to make it happen because there's no arrows for it. Anyone who's played the demo again knows that the bows use arrows, but this is essentially a magic weapon that shoots magic arrows. So I had to think, well, it shouldn't just be that by itself. That's a little boring. So what happens is now when you have rings on your character, every ring that they have affects the bow, which is how they work. They use rings to draw the arrows, and the rings affect the arrows. So if you have, say, so Sholei has a ring of Helja, which is a casting ring. Essentially, what they're like trainer rings. So they help you train certain spells. It makes it easier to cast them. If you're wearing that while you shoot a mage bow, because it's fire aspected, it will aspect the arrow into fire. So you'll shoot a flaming arrow instead, and it can cause burning. So that's the core concept of a mage bow, is that it coalesces essentially basic magic into an arrow that is highly modifiable through artificing. And who made that? It was the Kuldari, which the Kuldari made everything. in the ye olden times. They made both the mage bow and the linear bow. The mage bow came later, funny enough, even though the linear bow is more technologically advanced, so to speak, at least in the world. And every mage bow will essentially have different effects. So this one down there is the most basic, actually. It's literally it's just called a mage bow, whereas all the other ones have like a special name for them. So it's like it's almost like the basic just bow of mage bows, and it's also a weapon for artificers. So this will be essentially Ania's next weapon when she finds one, because they're a little rare compared to other weapons. Obviously, like it's a highly advanced artifice weapon, so it's not like there's tons of them lying around all over the place. But it will be pretty obvious, like, oh, this is a perfect weapon for her because it's an artifice weapon. It has the artifice mastery. She's going to have all sorts of bedazzled stuff on her, and that'll improve the weapon. So um, that's that. I think, is that the last one? Yep, that's the last slide that I have prepared. So I'm going to go back a little bit to this one here. Or I could go to the front. Let's just use this guy here. So I don't have footage necessarily for this part, but I still want to talk about it. And that's the mind altering spells that are a big part of chapter 6. So, what are mind altering spells? They're essentially the equivalent of, in Fire Emblem games or even D&D, they're your classic fear, confusion, berserk type spells. So they changed essentially the behavior of units. And I had essentially no code ready for that going into chapter 6. So I was like, it was one of those things that I knew I wanted to have in the game. I didn't really know how I was going to do it. I had an idea, but I didn't really know how I was going to do it. And I sort of been dreading adding it in, because when I add some of these things, then I know like there's this chance it's going to break the game. Like it's going to break something that's going to be really nebulous and hard to pin down and fix. And so but I had to do it for this one, because a big part of this chapter is essentially what is called compulsion magic. So you can, it's a big part of the history of Weimara and Evallon. So Evallon is the region that you're in, which is part of the continent of Weimara. And in Weimar, there was the people, the ancients that lived there. They used compulsion magic, almost kind of inadvertently. They just sort of do it naturally. Anyone that they're around, their charismatic power is so powerful that it just sort of forces any lesser mind into uh, doing whatever they want. And so it takes incredible willpower to even be around these people. And uh, as such, there's a long history of that, not only resisting it, but using it in Weimar. And that has continued long past those same ancients have left and been exiled from the lands. And mostly in the form of the Weimic Church. So Weim is the god of order, and compulsion magic comes from it. And even though it's not necessarily like evil magic, it's obviously used for nefarious deeds. Anytime you're forcing someone to do a task, it's not good usually. And there's always been this sort of like aura of, is the Viamic Church using compulsion to like get more followers? Do they use it to like make their warriors go into this like fervent rage of in battle? Like there's always been that question in the world on whether or not they do it. And in this map, it's a part of it. There's like, oh, maybe they are, and they're using it as a weapon in this case. And so it was tough, I'll say that much, to get it to work. And it does though. So I do now have the framework to essentially make units act out of turn. So that was the big problem, more or less, is how do I get a unit that's affected by the condition? The condition's easy to apply. It's just that boop a doop a doop. It's just like any other condition in the game. It's the behavior that was difficult, because then it was like, okay, I needed to know what team it's acting as, and I need to have it be logged into the list of units that are going to act this turn. All these kind of things, right? Making sure it goes on the right phase, and then making sure it targets the right people. So it was actually really funny, because I was testing essentially this spell, this compulsion spell, and it would apply, and I'd be like, all right, so this guy applied the compulsion. He's now controlling this person, and he throws a fireball at the enemy team, which is what he's not supposed to do. So he's like resisting the compulsion, literally in the code and not acting the way he was expected to. In some cases, like it was funny because I would have some of them work as intended and some of them not, and be like, this even goes to show how how inefficient compulsion magic is. It's a two-sided spell. Nobody should actually use it because as soon as it ends, they'll just turn on you. Um, but part of that, so like, and that is an aspect of it, right? If the compulsion effect ends, then their mind is freed, and if they're an ally, then they essentially join you and help you. But I like to think of the people you're fighting as not being stupid, right? They may be nefarious and they may be, you know, what's the word? They might be overconfident in what they're doing, right? And that leads to them losing inevitably as a like fighting the player. But I don't like to think of enemies of being just stupid, right? Just like, oh, they're just dimwits that never thought that this might go wrong. And they thought of that. And so I added in a new item into the game that is a recent discovery of the Viamic Church that essentially allows them to uh, minimize the possibility of people leaving the compulsion. So it's this kind of even more nefarious step that they've discovered by unearthing old magic and technology that the player discovers and comes across. And so I had to add that in and see how that worked. And it was this big medley of things that culminated to it finally just working. And I still need to make sure that it's a little more foolproof for myself, because there's kind of this issue where um, there's this ordering thing where I'll try and make it as simple as possible because it's very like code specific. But the idea being that every person who's compelled has a handler. There's someone who casts the spell on them, right? And so in the game, I have to script it so that the person who is being compelled, they know who that person is. But if that person doesn't exist yet in the game, say like they literally haven't been spawned into the game yet, they can't know. And um, so I've had to fiddle around with that and found that the best way is essentially just make sure that they spawn in a uh, I know that they're going to spawn in the right order. Um, but that's a lot of like that leaves a lot of openness for essentially bugs on my end, just like user bugs that I want to minimize. So I'm gonna have to fix it, maybe fuss around with it a little bit. But the fact of the matter is, it works. It works, and it conveys the sense of like, oh, you know, this is an issue in the world, and they behave as you would expect, and there's consequences if you just like kill the compelled person, which you can do. So that was another thing that I had to make, so that when players are facing them, that yes, it changes them to the enemy team, but you can tell that they're compelled. So it won't be like, oh, they turn red and they're just forever an enemy. They'll essentially be a green character, but they have the compelled sign, but you can choose to attack them. So if you have no means to remove the compulsion, for example, I don't want to make it so that like just code wise you can't fight them, because in warfare, right, if you had no alternative and you had to KO this person, you would do that. So I had to make little allowances in the code to make that happen, and it works. So it works just well. That was actually one of the easier parts. Um, but yeah, that's going to be another real interesting thing, because right now I don't think I have any. I mean, there are units that have the compulsion spell, so they can only compel one person at a time, though. So they can't have like an army of compelled people. At least not yet. There might be a spell that lets you do that later. But the idea is like you can only control one person at a time, right? Um, but they will be able to use that spell on your guys, and so um, it could be pretty bad if you're not prepared to dispel it. So that was the last big thing. Let me look at my notes real quick. Boop doop doop. The only other thing, yeah, there's a few other items that I unfortunately didn't have time to include in the slides. Mostly they were just like um, weapons and whatnot that I was filling out the certain item groups with. So in Arceus, which is where Chapter 6 takes place, they use what are called hallow weapons. They're weapons that are blessed with materials used that are order aspected. So they're essentially holy weapons, and they do a lot of damage to anything that is aberrant. So technically anything undead, but also outsider creatures, anything that's chaotically aspected, they do a ton of damage to. Um, and I essentially have all the weapons done for that. They all look really pretty. I may have posted a few of them later, but I'll probably do like a cool little showcase of all those items because they just look really nice. Um, oh yeah, there's music. So the music we weren't playing music this time, but we have Adams finished up essentially the rest of the music up until pretty much chapter 11. So we have all the tracks that we need almost. I think there's only one that he's still working on that's going to be really cool. He's getting a few of his Maori friends to do some haka chants in it. It's going to be really cool. Um, because it's the Mayavi. So they're the Eastern seafaring people. I've mentioned them a few times. It should be really cool. I think it's just taking a little long because he needs his friends to do it. He said he didn't want to try and do the haka himself, and so he's having a few friends do it. I even came up with the mythic language verbiage for the chants that they're going to use. So if it if it works, it will probably be really cool. But it might turn out that his Maori friends are like, "Nah, this just sounds like gobbledygook in Maori, and I'm not gonna. This will be offensive to my people." Which in that case, I'm like, "Fine, don't do it. We can make the music without it." Um, but all the new tracks sound really good. I have the tracks for this, so the next chapter after this is going to be really fun because we get another backer character that I get to introduce. Isadara is introduced into this chapter, so it's not chapter 7, it's the first interlude. So it's kind of like a play, right? It's a story, it's written like a story, so it has little like sections that are technically not part of the main story. There are smaller chapters that have a smaller number of units that they just go quicker, but it's more story focused and like, okay, it's like a transitional. There are essentially transitional chapters that are meant to convey like, oh, this is a change in it, not only the scenery but the direction of the game. Like you're no longer just working for the Evallonian Empire now. Now you're on this like quest thing that you're doing. So Isadara is going to be introduced, which is going to be really fun to like flesh out her character, add her in. The backer character, which Azarfiti's character, is going to be really cool to introduce. I get to work on his stuff, like so his portrait's more or less done, or at least the design is done. But I got to do all the sprite work for him and the spells, and he has some really cool spells and items that I'm looking forward to including. So that's going to be very, very fun. And of course, I'll be showing off all the new characters and stuff for that. Uh, but I got a little ahead of myself and made some new characters. So I showcased one of those characters, who she's part of a group that I'll talk about later because they're gonna need their own lore story. But she was a really fun character to design. I'm debating whether or not she's gonna be recruitable because she's supposed to just be an enemy. But I do this thing where I'm like, okay, this battle needs a boss. So I draw the design, I make the character, I do their like backstory, where they fall into the storyline and whatnot. Usually, like I have the character like, and by that I mean like I have the characters and notes and whatnot, right? That I've written out who they are and what they do, but I haven't drawn them up or anything. So I look at my notes, I find out what character I need to draw. I do their drawing, and then I'm like, they don't look evil though. They look cool, and the design is really nice, and they look culturally accurate for the part of the world they're in, but they look like a player character. Because I don't like making so there's this trope for those of you who don't play any Fire Emblem. There's kind of this trope in Fire Emblem that if you meet an ugly person, that they're usually an enemy, right? If you meet a pretty person or a young person, they're usually a recruitable character. Yeah, seriously, I was kind of like annoyed at myself, right? Because I was like, okay, so I was kind of inspired by this old design of a character I really like from a fighting game, and it sounded like a great way to like do a little Easter egg nod to it, where it's kind of like maybe a little bit of a throwaway character that you fight in one battle, and it'd just be cool. But then I drew the character, and I did all the designs, and I did all the cool artwork, and I gave her a special sword, and then I gave her a name, and I'm like, wow, she's got a cool name. And I was like, oh, you know, it would be cool if she was related to the Master Swordsmith, blah blah blah. If you've watched the lore video, Kamuli. So her name is Ateri Kamuli. So I was like, oh, that's why she has a Kamuli blade, because she's like the granddaughter of Kamuli. And it's like, wait, now she's a player character though. She's not an enemy because she has too much cool lore and her design rules. So I'm waffling on whether or not she's going to be like. I might make it so that she's not difficult to recruit, but more like a kind of a you can recruit her, but you're probably just gonna fight her and kill her, right? So I'm debating on. I might run some things by the community and be like, of course I'm sure other people are like, no, she's cool. I want her to be recruitable. Yeah, it kind of feels like that. I don't think you guys can hear Lilette, but um, yeah, it's like finding a stray cat and naming it. It's like, oh no, now I love. That's what Edinburgh said. And hi guys, thank you for joining. Um, so yeah, I might make it so that she's because I have like you can capture characters, right? So even though there's lots of enemies that technically you can capture, and eventually convince to join you, they don't have like dense companion threads or like supports as they would be called in Fire Emblem. So they're technically they can become a unit that joins you, but they're not really story units, right? They're kind of a bonus unit that you can get, and probably if you're playing on hardcore or permadeath mode, that oh yeah, I've read that exact one. Yeah, and I'm trying to find anyone who might defect to our side. It's a yeah, that's literally what I'm talking about. Okay, yeah. So, anyone who's played Fire Emblem 7, so the one with Ellawood and Lynn, there's this comic, and I've read this exact comic where they're sitting next to each other. What are you looking at? The enemy lines. I'm trying to define who of them might defect to our side. There's literally like a bunch of ugly bandits, right, with their thick jaws and forward brows and missing teeth. And then amongst them is the pretty boy with the bandana and the nice hair. And Lynn just says, that one. So, but that's the thing is like I don't really like that trope because I don't like black and white kind of characterizations, and I don't like thinking of like if there's bandits and it's obvious they're bandits, I don't mind. There's literally a few characters in the game that I've designed. They're obviously meant to be a little scummy, but when a character bridges that right and they hit that like they're cool, but they're also an enemy and they're probably a little evil. What do I do? And so I think I'm gonna make it so that she's a difficult kind of join, where it's like if you manage to get her to join you, you kind of earned her, right? But it's more likely you'll treat her as a boss and she'll lose. Like you won't get her, right? But she's not gonna affect your party composition if you miss her, right? It's not like, oh no, I missed one of the best characters in the game. Hmm. Yeah, that's something that I would probably get right. So one of the people in the comments, one of the Etten Bros, if you guys know them, they're super cool. They're both developers as well. that I chat with, play games with all the time. They're awesome. One of them said that it would be very cool to have side quests for lots of the characters. Stefan said that. And that is definitely something I love about side quests, especially in the Fire Emblem games. And I might even have it so that like characters that if you don't kill them, you can recruit them later in a side quest. I also kind of like those things. So um, we will see. I think because I have to like limit myself, right? Because my favorite thing in the game is drawing characters and making characters. And so if I am not careful, I'll be like, look, I added 10 more characters that I have to now write a story for that takes way longer than drawing them. So um, I need to know my limits, right? And so I think I'm going to try and focus on having core characters that are essentially easily recruited, right? They're easily recruited characters that they have a lot of story stuff in, a lot of character development because they're younger, for example, and they have a lot to talk about. And then there's the kind of special extras that if you get them, good on you. They're fun characters. Maybe they might even have quirks about them, right? Because like Atari, for example, she's missing an arm, and I'm gonna have that as part of the game, and that she can only equip one-handed weapons. And that people, if she, if you do get her to join you, that like people mention that like how have you stayed such a good sword fighter but with only one arm, and she'll like she'll probably be almost a comic relief character, right? Where she doesn't take anything seriously, she's not really meant to be taken seriously, and she won't have any deep intriguing storylines other than like how did you end up as this person? Like other than like her backstory, right? That might be intriguing, but she's not gonna have like romance options and whatnot that get like convoluted and take up a ton of time, which is really what I need to not do, right? Because I have done a quick run through of like, okay, from start to finish, how much work is a single character? And it's a lot. It's a lot of work. So she may just be
Can
a
you hear me?
boss, but she may also be a potential recruit. And I have an idea on how I'm going to do it. So there will be dueling in the game. Huh?
Wait, can you hear me? I think I fixed it.
I can't hear you, but that might just be Discord.
Oh, can everyone else hear me?
Yeah, that would be the better question to ask. Let's change up the page. Traps. But so dueling is another little side feature I want to add in the game, where essentially what it does is it plays out a battle to completion. So whoever wins first. So if you pick someone and you say, "I want to duel you," um, it essentially just runs through the battle until one of you wins or loses. So what I want to do is that occasionally units will pop up with a little symbol that will say, "Oh, I hear reverb on my end." So I think your mic's working now. You should try speaking, Lilette.
Oh, hello. Can you guys hear me
Now
now?
I can hear you now.
Okay, cool. All right, I think it works now. So I'm just trying to catch everyone up with the comments, the lovely comments. And yeah, so we have a fellow developer in the chat, and he was saying you can do super short quests for them, short and punchy, and but like my favorite comment so far is like including like ugly NPCs that you can recruit.
Yeah, I also like that. One of my favorite characters from Fire Emblem is Gonzalez, and he looks just like the type of enemy that you would not recruit, that you would fight, but he is recruitable, and he's one of the best characters in the game. Um, and so I do like the idea of like having ugly people that are part of your team. I just end up drawing pretty people because pretty people are fun to draw. So I do need to add a little more diversity in the looks of people, and I have a few people sketched out in mind. So there will be some more rugged-looking individuals that join your team at some point.
I mean, how about ruggedly ugly individuals, huh? Huh?
I mean, yeah, like so. What? Okay, at what point does rugged become ugly? Like, is there a boundary between like rugged and then like gravelly, or like
No.
like I guess there's craggy, right? There's rugged and then craggy.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, I guess that's a hybrid between the two, you know. It's like the Prius. You put two Well, actually that's more electric. It's like one of those really awful cars that are hybrid and they just look extremely distasteful, okay? But yeah, you know, like you could make them hanky, I guess would be the word.
Okay. But yeah, I will probably make sure that there's at least like one or two, pretty fugly looking people that are just like gentle at heart, and maybe they just been through one too many battles, and they're just lovable, you know,
Look,
beat up dudes.
that sounds like you know, you're trying to give them a break. No. Just commit to the ugly bit.
Ugly on the outside and the inside. Full ugly.
Yeah, full ugly. I will
Uh,
recruit them. Just watch. I will make them so powerful.
you'll be on the hunt, and you'll be like, all my funds and resources go to you.
Yes. All of my funds and resources go to Hanky Panky over here.
Okay. Any other notes I have here? Um, Yeah, so the only other thing of note that is not visually that interesting is just the heat mapping update, which is essentially the new way that area of effects are calculated for NPCs. So for players, it's real easy. Like, we have kind of an intuitive sense of, well, if I put this here, it hits more people. But for computers, it's harder to do because, at least with the system I made, maybe if I knew what I was doing, um, I could have come up with a slicker method years ago
Yeah,
when I was
how dare
playing
you
around with this.
start, you know, a game of your own and then have to
Yeah, I
learn.
know, right? And I had so there was an existing one and it worked, but it was really slow because essentially it would check every single tile and be like, how many people are in this tile? How many people are in this tile? How many people are in this tile? And it was really accurate, but really slow. And slowness is not what you want in a game like this, especially because there's so many units acting every turn. I knew from the get go that it had to be completely redone. So I made a new method, and it's a heat mapping method. Essentially, what it does is when it picks a spell, it's like, okay, this is the spell I'm using. It goes to all the units on the map and makes them project essentially a shape of the area. And then it says, okay, where is the highest density of those projected ones? So it can essentially pick the highest density area without having to individually do all of them like it did before. And then it's just like, it's essentially one loop of code. Okay, now I know what the heat map is. Pick the best heat map spot, bada bing, throws a fireball. It takes like a fraction of the time. It doesn't have to iterate through a bunch of things either, which is so much better.
Do you
So
ever have trouble with the just the math of the game? Just math in programming?
sometimes I do. Thankfully, like, honestly, I'm actually really glad I spent as much time on trigonometry as I did, because I use a lot of trig in this game, because I have to calculate like projectile stuff and angles of so for example, I had to figure out okay, so using the new heat mapping method, right, works great for like squares or the diamonds or even like circles or whatever. Anything you could like feasibly stamp down, right, and be like, okay, just you're gonna pick that central spot and see what it hits, right? Really, really fast, really, really accurate with the heat mapping method. The line spells were very different though, right? Because the line spells in the game, you can point them in any direction you want to get this like the perfect line that you want. Um, but feasibly, like, how do you do that in code with an NPC, right? And I had to fuss around with that for like 2 days because um, the heat mapping method was working really good with all the other spells, but I knew like, oh, but this is going to be a pain to do with the line spells. So I tried some things out that didn't work, and then I kind of got halfway through a few other attempts, and it's like, no, this isn't going to work either. Until I finally decided, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use the heat mapping method essentially as is. It's going to find the highest density point, and then I'm going to have it extend what I was finding. So like that kind of worked, but what I realized is they would pick like the center of a pile of people instead of shooting through them, right? Because a line spell, you got hit from like one end to the other. So I thought, oh, well, what I'll do is they'll pick that heat mapping spot, and then I'll make sure that it projects from that heat mapping spot whatever extra range they haven't used, right? And then see if they essentially get more units in that line. Um, so it was a faster than the existing method. It used the heat mapping, and then it was like 9 o'clock like on Friday, or maybe I think it was 9 o'clock Friday, maybe Thursday. I don't remember which, but I was like, I can't get this to work. And then I was like, well, wait, it might be working. If this works, then I'm done for tonight. And then the person like moved to a line and hit the exact amount of people that a player would have done, picked the right spot. It was perfect. I was like, good. Okay, now I can be done with it. So there is definitely some mathy moments that just like make me do that meme thing where there's just like, you know, formulas buzzing in the back of my head like, shouldn't I remember how to do opposite over hypotenuse, and how do I calculate the shape of a circle as a graph, and like all these things. So I do end up having to do a lot of math, and sometimes it's not so bad. I actually like I love it when the intelligent part of my barbarian brain says, hey, this code sucks to have to do. Why don't we make a script for it so you never have to do it again? Um, like trig, for example. I can do trigonometry, but doing it in code is obnoxious because if you do something wrong, and it's easy to do something wrong with trig in code, then you have to bug fix, right? So I just wrote up a script so I would never have to do this one thing ever again, and it works great now. And it makes things like this a lot easier. So that, and like there are some math things that I think, so like very early on when I was making Lords of Nysera, I had to learn a little bit about what's called A-star pathing, right? Because there's some stuff that's programming, but it's math adjacent, right? And it requires programming knowledge and math knowledge to properly really like commingle and make happen. And I just didn't have enough programming knowledge to really hammer out some of these pathing things because it's complex. Like it's really complex stuff, and I sort of jury rigged a lot of it on my own through trial and error. And that's why I have to like remake a bunch of things sometimes where it's like, oh, I got it to work, but now that I added in a spell that's, instead of a tiny little diamond, it's a 5x5 square blizzard, right? And then I hand it off to the NPC and be like, okay, now find the position. And it's like 2 days later, it's right there. I was like, oh, okay. So I gotta redo this thing now. And now I'm able, like, I'm so nitpicky about it because I can tell when there's slowdowns too. So it's like, oh great, something is like chugging along. I need to find out where the slowdown is, and then I've pinpointed it. It's like, oh, okay, I gotta figure out what's causing this like really slow calculation, whatever it may be. So
By
that
the
was a
way,
very long answer to yes, I have to do math.
well, okay. I want to add. So you found something, right? Like this the last few days here. You found some old Nysera stuff, right?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, really old stuff. So, like, essentially, when I came up with the idea of the world itself. So, this was when I was in my first couple, like, I think my first year of college. Um, and I was messing around with an idea. I was learning a little bit of code to mod games. And I was essentially in my like regular every year or so, I get into a kind of Fire Emblem vibe, right? Where it's like, I want to play Fire Emblem. So I play one or two games over the course of a month or so. And this time instead, I was like, it would be fun to design a bunch of characters for a game and come up with my own story and integrate this little like fantasy world I've been doodling up ideas for and whatnot, because I'd been kind of making a couple of characters for, it was originally going to be like some kind of comic that I was thinking of doing, but then I decided, well, this is actually kind of weave in pretty well as like a storyline, and so I drew up a bunch of really quick sketches of like, okay, here's what this character looks like, and kind of cover all the classes, right? And then I made a list of the class types that I would want and the different items, and then I started doing some of the legendary items, kind of like basic Fire Emblem framework ideas. And so I was flipping through this old notebook actually from my parents' place, because they're like, "Hey, we got a bunch of these old notebooks from your school. Do you want them?" And most of them, I would flip through it. Nah, it's just homework stuff. Nah, I don't want that. And I found this one. I was like, "Whoa! Look, it's the first drawing of Sholei ever. Like my first like doodle of the character, right?" And he looked different, obviously. Um, and all these other characters that I either scrapped or forgot about or didn't use, that were just like too boring and basic. But like so many of these things, like familiar names in parts of the world that were in like the fetal stage of development, right? Like it wasn't even a game idea at that point. It was just characters and a bunch of sketches. So it was really cool to come across that. And I'll probably see if I can. It was literally drawn into a a school notebook, right? So like the blue and red lines and junk. So I might scan it. We have a scanner, so I might scan it actually and be like, look, this is the OG drawings of some of the characters from I don't even know how many years ago now, that were just ideas back then, and now it's a game. So now it's a game that's almost that's just roaring along in the development, and is going to be coming out in the near future. It was pretty cool to see kind of the origin point, and just kind of out of nowhere, just this little treasure that I found. Because I have lots of sketches, and I save almost all my sketches, but to find the OGs was funny.
All right. Yeah. So the art book, we're gonna be putting it in there, and
Uh huh.
I was just chatting with Edinburgh here about it, and he was asking about the physical copy.
Oh, like a physical copy of the art book?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that would be something we might do later. It might be it won't be included as part of like the Kickstarter, right? So um it'll just be purely digital for the Kickstarter variant in this case. It was just a fun little add-on. It's gonna be really well done. That's not to say that we're not gonna it's gonna be jam-packed with so much artwork, because like my my iPad here is like just got pages and pages and pages and pages of sketches that we're gonna format and put into a really nice kind of like the goal is going to have it so that like it literally flips like a little book, right? And I want to have a little section if I can. My brother really inspired me to do this, because he's doing his own little game project right now, and he likes to draw sketches like the old manuals. And I thought, oh, that would be really fun to do like a little player's guide, like a mini player's guide on like the basics of the game, right? In the art manual. So just like a couple pages are like, use this, like use magic, blah blah blah, and having hand drawn pictures on of the characters using it, whatever it may be. So I just thought it was neat. It's going to be a fun project, and as part of that, we are going to scan in those old drawings, be like, this is what it looked like so long ago. Here's what they look like now, like to show the progression of not only like the idea of the game, but my art, right, from like derpy little sketches of my characters to pretty nice looking pixel art, right? Like it should be really neat.
And then on YouTube here, we've got some folks
Hmm.
talking about just like when the game will be released.
Ah, yeah. Um, so that's come into a little bit of question for us, because we are making great progress, but we're also tracking how long it takes to do every
Oh
chapter.
yeah, yeah, yeah. That's kind
And
of been like an experience too, because we had no idea just rolling full steam because you were working at the time. Like you had a full
mhm,
time job when you were plugging away at the game before this. Uh,
right, which took forever to get chapters done. Like when I
yeah,
was working the full time job, it was like it would sometimes take months to get a single chapter done because I was also working on core features, right? So it was more so make a chapter so that I can like do the battle system and stuff like that,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. And like in general, we're going to have this in early access 2025. I kind of suspect, so we posted a timeline months ago, kind of like to first stab at like, okay, you know what, here's our ambitious like targets, right? And I think that's something we'll want to revisit in another Kickstarter post. It's just like a timeline posting, you know.
I
Because
think
I suspect that we're gonna move it up just a little bit, in order to release 11, or eight to 11 chapters is has always been our target.
I
Um,
think the goal, like I think the hope at least will be that by the February-ish time that we had hoped for a release, right? We probably won't get the release that we want at the time. Um, but my goal will be that we're in a at least some form of a play test, right? Where we have people actively testing as many chapters as we have, so that we're preparing, so that we're as close to prepared for an early release as possible, right? But very likely we will not have the 12 chapters or 11 like up to chapter 11 done that we want,
yeah,
but
I think you were really ambitious
we'll
with
be
your
working
targets.
on it. And like it was ambitious, but I think especially now that like we're at a stage where there's a good chunk of the game that people could play right now, right? But nobody has. Um, they've played chapter 1 and the prologue, maybe a little bit of the arena, but they haven't really dug their teeth into like how how does the game progress, right? After multiple chapters, how does my equipment progress? How is et cetera, right? Learning new spells and whatnot. And that really has not been play tested whatsoever, even by me. Like I've done a few dry runs of chapters in concert, right? Testing to make sure, mostly to make sure that it actually works, that you can play between different chapters. And it does. Um, but it takes a lot of time to just like play the game over and over again, obviously. And so I think the goal will actually be to be starting a very early play test soon, actually. Once we've finished up chapter 6, I'm essentially going to do a playthrough myself, get rid of any major bugs that I notice, and then we're going to open up to a very limited play test. So we'll be reaching out to people we know first, literally people that we know by name, to do like a really early, okay, make sure this runs on your game. If you have time, play through it, report bugs in this format, and then we're going to survey them more or less on like how much was broken. It's going to be a little involved, right? And it's going to be small, and then we're going to expand that playtest to essentially the Kickstarter group, because the Kickstarter and the people in the Patreon, they paid to be a part of that, right? And I know a lot of people really want to be a part of it. So we're going to do like that initial stage of, okay, we got through all the really bad, nasty bugs, because we don't want people reporting the same thing over and over again, right? So you get through all the nasty bugs, and then it becomes, this is not necessarily about bugs or even like graphical like issues or even, you know, like bad writing and whatnot. It's, what do you think of the gameplay, right? What do you think of the chapters? What do you think of the characterization of some units, their use, whether they're even useful, whether they die too easily, whether the game's balanced even remotely, right? That's going to be, I think, something that we need to do before we even get 11 chapters done, right? Like that, I think that was an easy goal to want to have. Like, oh, we have 11 chapters and we release the game. But I think if we had even these 6 chapters, but they were like rock solid, right? We had like thoroughly play tested them, um, with a pretty good number of people, and not necessarily release it with only 6 chapters, but then we're like, hey guys, we're at February, 1st of February, and we are really happy with the initial play testing that we've done. The play testers have been super helpful. We've had to redo some of the chapters, which means that we are 6 chapters away from the amount we were expecting. But we are really happy with how they turned out, and so we're going to delay the initial release 6 months, right? That that's what I kind of expect will happen. Um, if we're lucky, maybe we get all of them done. But I think it's really important that we focus on, especially with how really experimental a lot of the stuff is in this game, right? That we really do play test it strictly um, and robustly before we move forward with even a ton of chapters. So this next month probably is going to be me pretty much I'm gonna do a play test of my own because I'm gonna be able to catch a lot of things and fix them right away so I don't send off a broken mess to somebody who's like, why can't I start the game? And it's like, yeah, I know, I'm sorry. So I'm gonna do a pretty much a play test of the game all this month. I might even record some of it just to show off. Um, and then we're gonna probably try and play test for another month with a small group of people. Maybe expand it out to a group of people who are essentially they'll have like, do you guys have a week of time? Not like a full week of time, but like where you can dedicate an hour or two to testing, reviewing, like giving input, etc. In a little round table group of the Discord. So that by at least like 2 months from now, we know whether we're on the right track. Because the one thing I don't want to do is have 11 chapters done by February, right? And they're a janky mess of poorly idealized features, or the features that people are ignoring or not using or just finding annoying. So we really want to make sure that we focus on what people are responding to in the game, right? And we have a lot here now. I think even with like after chapter 6, like there's a lot to introduce to people. And the more that is added to the game, the more we can always add back into chapters, of course. But now that we have like this robust amount of stuff, right? We have weapons, spells, all these different things that people can utilize. Um, we gotta see what they think before we do more and dig ourselves potentially into a hole. And I may be like over exaggerating how like dangerous or risky it is that what we're doing, but I think it's better to be safe um, with wasting too much time on things that could be problematic later, as opposed to just seeing how people think and just being okay with like letting people try the game out in a very experimental phase and being okay with the criticism of like, yeah, this isn't very good, like this feature kind of doesn't work well, or like I know what's going to happen for lots of people, right? It's like, oh, I didn't even know you could do this in the game, right? I didn't know that you could hide or that you could dismount or that you could do any number of various actions in the game because I never thought of introducing it to them. So that is a long-winded ramble. And is there any other things that people have asked, let so before I start off into another thing?
Yeah, let me check real quick. It looks. Actually, I'll give them a couple seconds here just in case. But let me check. There's any currently? No, there's just been like a general excitement expressed. I think like we've all just been following the progress, and it's just exciting to be able to see all of the new things. And one of the things that, at least I'm a big fan of in the indie game scene, is quality games.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I'm looking forward to just having a quality game. I think that's our number one target, is making sure that whatever is output, whether it's 6 chapters, 11 chapters, that you're gonna really thoroughly enjoy this.
Mm-hmm. Right. And I think for sure, um, even just playing through and making the chapters, right? Like I'm pretty confident that every chapter is going to be intriguing, right? Every one of them has some cool aspect, not even like a gimmick, but like a legitimately interesting scenario that's like, whoa, this is very different than the last chapter, right? Some of the maps are huge and expansive and almost daunting, but then you get through it and the next chapter is like, nicely condensed and compact, and the battle just like kicks off right away. And some of them is like, oh, we're at the sea now, and we're carrying all these people to a beach battle, and the scenery is totally different, and the music's different. And then another battle, it's like, oh, we're competing with another lord, so we're not just like fighting for our lives anymore. It's like almost weird social games in amongst the lords. And then in this current one, it's just this like huge, devastating warfare going on between these two, huge armies essentially, and just like a nightmare of magic being just thrown around, which is what I want to express. Like, this is a magic world, and that means the the warfare is magical in like kind of the worst way possible, and that it's almost apocalyptic with how many things can be going on all at once, just causing mayhem. So it's I think it'll be really fun. I The only thing that right now, which is why I've been kind of trying to hammer out lots of these efficiency things in the game, is the pacing of the battles, right? Because there's lots of units sometimes, and even I find, as like in testing, I can be like, oh man, I don't want to wait for like all these units to go through their actions when I'm just testing one thing. I'm just gonna delete all these units with a debug input so I can just like test these two people fighting, right? Um, and my hope is that like people, when they're watching, they can almost be like, all right, I did all my actions. I'm gonna watch to see what the enemy does, take a drink of my coffee, maybe like almost kind of watching a battle play out, right? Um, but I don't want people to be like, God, this game is so slow. Right? Like, it just takes forever for units to move and do things, and you just end up feeling like you're just waiting for your turn for ages. So that will be one thing I really want to ask people about. Like, how do you feel about how long turns take? How do you feel about the pacing of battles? Do battles seem interesting, or does there seem like a lot of repeats with enemy like formations or tactics or whatever maybe? So, so yeah, there's a lot going on, lots of thoughts still being had, especially now that we're like really nearing a testing phase, right? Because I've got essentially all the big features that I want hammered out, and like functioning in the game, right? So there's functioning, and then there's optimized, right? So I have most things functioning. I want to see what people do with it now. And that's going to be the next step. So that's why this was a big speaker Sunday, right? Because it's like, all right, guys, we did all the work. We did all this work. It's time to start like kicking it off to you guys, and get some real proper feedback, right? Because I think the excitement has been there to like for people to get their hands on it and try it. Um, we just want to make sure that we get the most possible feedback from it.
And just to be clear too, this was a backer exclusive testing, or is this a different kind of testing tone?
So the first initial stages will be like essentially, Lillette and I have essentially a few close friends and um, family that will be testing it, so that I can talk directly with them, right? People that I can be very candid with. That's going to be
Or just
like,
like face-to-face testing. I
yeah,
actually
it'll
found
be
it
a very, yeah, face-to-face testing that
it's a
essentially
little
will be
different, yeah.
so that like I can be really clear with them, like this will probably be broken nonsense that we have to deal with. I don't want to hand this off even to like the backer playtesters, right? Because it will just be, we need to squash as many problems um, first. That's so this isn't part of that playtest phase, but within a month from now, vaguely is my hope. Um, we will actually be opening it up to the Kickstarter playtesting. So these will be people who want to be part of that phase. Then again, like they will be warned, like all your saves, they will not be viable by the time the game releases. Like all your saves will be broken, all your progress will be lost essentially. This is to make sure that the game that is played by everybody else is the best it can be.
You mean like
So
the 10 saves I have in Harvest Moon? You mean that? I mean not Harvest Moon, sorry, Stardew Valley.
Yeah, so if anyone played Baldur's Gate 3 like I did, where it's like, oh, cool, the game's out, I want to try it, and didn't realize it was like the early access and like proper early access, which is the game is broke as frick and you're helping us unbreak it. um, that's going to be essentially the second stage. So I don't know what the actual proper like wordage is of it.
And then Edensoft Bro said, add a fast forward button, and that would solve the issue. And he's looking forward to being brutally honest.
Yeah, that would actually be a nice thing to just add in, like when your turn is over, right? A little bar just goes boop and pops up, and you can just like click to either skip a specific, like skip to the end of a unit's action, right? Or just like press fast forward and just like watch everyone just like move about. And it doesn't bother looking pretty or anything. It just literally does all the actions that need to be done as fast as possible. Because in its current state right now, I mean, I could definitely figure out a way to fast, like just like snap through everything where it just skips the turn. But that might break some things.
Yeah,
So
Edensoft Bro says skipping might be dangerous, but fast
mhm.
forward. You can
Fast
still
forwarding
see.
has worked so far for me for a few things where it essentially just like cuts down. There's like no timers, right? Because like right now it essentially paces it out so that there's time between actions, and it would just cut that time down to zilch, and people would move instantaneously as opposed to doing the little running animations and whatnot. And they would just do like calculate the damage, no timers, everyone moves really fast, and just zoom through everything without essentially changing anything, right? That would probably be the feature that I add in because once people have probably like play, especially if they like reload, right, and they don't want to watch something go all over again, then yeah, having that feature would probably help a lot. And for my own bug testing purposes would probably help a lot. So that might actually be something I figure out before I release it for playtesting for sure. But yeah, so for those who are wondering, there will be a very small, I'm going to call it the stage one of the playtest, right? Or maybe stage zero. So stage zero of the playtest. Um, Stage -1 was the demo, right? This was to get people's immediate feedback. Uh, it's a proof of concept. People know that it's a legitimate game that's being developed, that there's cool stuff that can be done, and they just gotta wait. Stage zero is going to be okay, guys. We have the actual cross section of the core gameplay that will be featured, and we need to know um, and before we can even show that to people, we need to make sure it's playable. So that's going to be the stage zero. It's probably going to be no more than like 10 people that I can talk closely with that I know. And I won't be opening up people for like, hey, do you want to do this? I won't be asking people. The people that will know me and I will contact them. That's going to be stage zero. So sorry for the people that want to be a part of that, but honestly, you won't want to be because it'll be a mess. um, but stage one will be shortly after that, right? So once those 10 some people that I've contacted and worked with, they're like, yep, I played through the whole thing, bug free essentially, maybe some graphical bugs, maybe some goofy little things here and there, but otherwise, no big crashes, no big, issues with the save system or with the scenes, like there was no soft locking, maybe a few things where like I had to click a few times to get back to something that was a little weird, but otherwise like the game was playable from start to finish and I could actually experience the game, right? Then I can essentially greenlight it for, all right, now we open it up to the Kickstarter backer people who want to participate in it. And it's like, all right, guys, here's up to essentially chapter 6. This isn't exactly how the game will be played, but that's why we need to know what's good and bad. And so that will be actually part of the official Kickstarter playtesting. Um, and we're probably going to essentially make a whole Discord forum for that to just be like, here's where we discuss thoughts on the gameplay, on the chapters, on this and that. And then Lilette is very good at the bug reporting stuff, and I'm gonna have her teach me how to handle the Jira things because we'll have to get back into the Jira stuff so that we can track bugs and not have repeats. But the goal really will be not so much bug tracking and bug fixing at that stage, but impressions, right, on gameplay and balancing and whether features are fun, pretty much. And the hope will be that people are like, "This is really cool. I really like how this plays out." And I get to see people do some crazy shit. I want to see some people be like, "Hey guys, even in the playtest, this is my traps only method, and I win every battle without having to lift a finger." Like some crazy stuff that people come up with, so that I can be like, "Oh, that's really neat," or "Oh yeah, that we gotta remove that. They shouldn't be able to do that." um, so it should be really fun because I think it will give me a break personally from having to stress about getting like cranking out chapters, right? I'll still be working on chapters in the background because I will always be progressing, of course, but it will be great to hear really good feedback and watch people play and whatnot. So as far as like whether or not people can stream, I don't think this will be a streaming thing, right? Because this again, like this will be mostly play testing and feedback. So if people really want to, like, I guess maybe stream their stuff, I don't know. I'll have to think about that. I'll probably say no on streaming for now, unless it's like people I know. The Edinburghs, for example, they've streamed my demo, and that was fine because it was the demo. It was publicly available and whatnot. But like this stuff, I might want to keep to just the community. So we'll see about that. We'll hash out the details. But
Yeah, I
yeah,
definitely agree with that, especially since it was funded via Kickstarter.
right.
And we've got just so many awesome backers that have been amazing. And so, yeah, it would be, a really fun thing to just
It would
release
be really
exclusively.
fun to essentially compile a list of tactics that, like almost like early meta, right? That playtesters have come up with for the game. That would be really interesting to kind of make a little a meta list of just things that people have already exploited and utilized to kind of show off, to be like, yeah, people really like XYZ about it, and here's examples of people doing things that I never did in the game even while developing. So I might showcase some cool things that people did, but I think we'll definitely keep any footage and whatnot to the community. But yeah, that's kind of the state of things right now. We're really happy with the progress. Chapter 6 is almost done, which will be a relief because it's been a lot of work. Been fun. Um, and it's been really, really cool seeing so many things come together, but it has been a lot. And the interlude chapter coming up will be very fun because I'll get to add in a few classes I've been really wanting to do, and now that I have the summoning system in, uh, I'm gonna put that to use because you fight summoners in the first interlude, and that's gonna be really fun to do. I get to do the new backer character, which I've been itching to make Azerfides character for a while now, and so that would be a kind of relaxing chapter because it's going to be a smaller chapter, right? So I won't have to do so much crazy stuff for it, and it won't be as difficult of a coding process. So it'll be nice to kind of work on the playtesting and on the side doing a little bit of the work for the chapter to keep the game progressing forward while also getting good feedback and whatnot. So
So, what lies ahead in the next month?
okay, so yeah, since we're closing out a month pretty soon, right? So the end of this month will be the finishing of chapter 6, which is good. Um, that essentially closes out the first 25% of the game, which is pretty sweet. Like we're 25% of the way done. That may seem like a small amount, but considering like all the stuff that's going on and that is built up to this, and the number of chapters we've made in this amount of time, compared to like the early development, which, like I said before, took months to get a single chapter done in some cases, especially because I would make a chapter and be like, oh, well, I completely redid everything, so I gotta go back and essentially wipe this whole thing and remake it again. Um, and now we're just like cruising along and making chapters looking great. We're doing good. But now that this essentially stage of the development is finished, this 25% stage, This month, what people can look forward to is for those of you who I do know personally, the Edsoft Bros, for example, I know have been champing at the bit to help me playtest the game. Um, they they can look forward to playing around with the early playtest version up to chapter 6, along with my friends and family that I know very well. But that again will be kind of behind closed doors, so it's mostly a development thing, not really a community thing. Um, but they will get to see essentially me. I'm going to do a bunch of footage of my playthroughs. So I'm essentially just going to be recording while I play through the entire game and in its current state, and just remarking on things, trying out stuff, taking notes. I was talking to my brother about how I'm literally just going to sit down. I'm going to go start to finish, play the whole game, not do any code, not like, oh no, this doesn't look right. I'm gonna pause the game, reload it, like change some code and then reload it, sort of thing. I'm just be like, nope, I'm just gonna make a huge list of all my notes on my playthrough. I'm gonna record everything, no matter how it looks in its state, and just play the game. Just play the game up to chapter 6, see how it turns out, see what I think is still needed, what's missing, whatever it may be, right? And just enjoy playing it. And that will be footage I've released of like, look how far we've come. Here's kind of what the game looks like right now. And then by the end of this month, I will be confident that like it's in a state where it can open up to the initial playtest for the Kickstarter group. So what would that be? So this August will be inner playtest phase 0, and then August, September, so, right? So beginning of September, then people can look forward to the drop, so to speak, of all right, playtest is opened up for those who want to participate. Join this Discord. You'll be part of this. You'll get pinged on this and that for updates and new versions, etc., and the GitHub and yada yada, whatever it may be, right? Like that's where all the info is going to drop, is essentially beginning of September on playtesting phase. So that's what people can look forward to. And then after that point, it's just going to be kind of back to work. If things are going well with the playtesting, if there is like, if we do find like there's some serious issues with the game balance or the game progression, whatever it may be, and we're getting like a lot of real critical feedback on some things, we might have to rework something. Like if we decide like, oh boy, this like the way this is playing out, be it a feature in the game that's core to it, and who knows what that may be, maybe it's the spells even, that people are really not liking how it's utilized, or maybe it's just way too easy, whatever it may be, um, then we'll have to recalibrate, and we'll keep working at it. But if things go well, then after that kind of opened up playtesting phase in September, where we've got a bunch of people who've given feedback on all 6 chapters and whatnot, then we just keep chugging along. We use that feedback to build out new chapters. We maybe set another, we retarget for when we're going to have a public release for the game in early access, and that may be 6 months from then, it may be a year from then, if we're really feeling like, oh yeah, we need to keep working harder on chasing that MVP for the map, um, then it may be longer than we were expecting. But the goal will be that we have as many people possible playing as much of the game as we're comfortable with as possible by then. So yeah.
Awesome. Awesome, awesome. Thanks you guys. Thanks so much for having us, and yeah, I mean, if you have any questions too, pop them in the chat here, and
Oh yeah.
we'll answer them now, and or on the Discord. So
And for anyone who misses the stream here and is watching it on YouTube, oh, excuse me, feel free to, of course, ask those questions that you have in the Discord. You can do it in the Speaker Sunday channel or just in the Ask the Dev channel, and we will respond. And because we are happy to engage and ask answer questions about the development process and features. We've had a few cool questions previously about like how are the animations going for the battle system, which is to say they're not there yet because that is not a focus right now. As much as I would love to do all that artwork, I have to focus before I get ahead of myself. Um, so yeah. Anything else that popped up in the chat?
Well, we've got Red Star in the chat right now, so say hello.
Hello.
And then let's get to some questions. Okay, all right, so let's see here. Yeah, no, honestly, everyone's just really excited for the timeline that we've kind of mentioned here. I think it'd be great to post a timeline via Kickstarter too.
Yeah, we're going to be doing a big Kickstarter update this week just because we've got all this obviously and we'll have the video up. And so I'm going to do a write-up that's going to show off some of the artwork that I mentioned, all the new characters, because there's just other stuff that I tried to cobble together the the slideshow as fast as I could.
No, you did great. This was great, honestly.
I wanted to really get the Giphies in because they really show off like the animations and the new spell effects and whatnot. The static images I can always post later, but this stuff is really important, I think, to present. But yeah, so we're gonna do a big Kickstarter update that's gonna expand on these timeline questions on like where the game's at, what we're expecting, it's and so on and so forth.
Awesome. Thanks so much for joining us, you guys,
Yep.
and we hope you have a great rest of your week and a good rest of your morning, afternoon, or night.
Yeah, wherever you are, we're happy you're here. So we'll talk to y'all later then, and we will keep you updated. We're going to be trying to do regular Speaker Sundays again. We had a bit of a slowdown, but that's because we were busy. We were busy working on the game, and we love talking to you guys, though. It's really fun to do these community events. And so I'm going to be getting back into it, especially because we're going to be talking with a lot more people about the playtesting and whatnot. So it'll be important to stay updated. So we will see you all the next time.
See you all next time.
Bye-bye.